Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural webinar on energy, Kenya's energy, new and renewable. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. Could you ask your questions in the chat function and we will answer them all during the allocated Q&A time at the end of the webinar. My name is Mahul Shah. I'm the Education Services Consultant for Kenya at Study Melbourne, which is the education arm for Global Victoria. We have an impressive lineup of presenters today, and Mr. Scott Morris, Trade Commissioner for Africa at Austrade, and Ms. Kim Cleary, Manager, Market Development and the Global Education Network, International Education at Global Victoria will introduce later. Apologies from my colleagues in Dubai, Mr. Qasim Yunus, General Manager, Middle East, Africa, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, and CIS, and Mr. Barish Sata, Director, Education Services, Middle East, Africa, and Turkey, both from the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office, which is based in Dubai. Due to prior commitments, Mr. Yunus and Mr. Sata are not able to join us today, but will join us in future webinars. Thank you to all the supporters for this webinar, including the Ministry of Energy Kenya, Monash University Melbourne, Swinburne University Melbourne, Austrade, Study Melbourne, the Australia Africa Chamber of Commerce, and the Kenya Australia Chamber of Commerce. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Scott Morris, Trade Commissioner for Africa at Austrade. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much, Mahul, for that kind introduction. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you join us today. And I'm Scott Morris. I'm the Trade Commissioner to Africa based here in Johannesburg. I'd like to begin talking to you this morning by saying that Kenya has been a leader in renewable energy, and as of 2020, 87% of Kenya's electricity has come from renewable sources. Last year, Kenya was ranked 7th globally in geothermal power generation. Kenya also has the largest wind farm in Africa, the Lake Turkana wind farm that I'll talk about a little later on. The Kenyan government has made progressive reforms enabling private investment in the green energy sector. I'd note in 2018, the Kenyan government launched the Kenya National Electrification Strategy. In 2019, Kenya enacted the Energy Act, which provides feed-in tariffs to encourage power generation from renewable sources. Kenya still has enormous potential in renewable energy. For instance, the installed geothermal capacity is 823 megawatts, but it has an estimated potential of 10,000 megawatts. Likewise, the wind capacity currently in Kenya is 335 megawatts against an estimated total potential of 3,000 megawatts in future. In reference to Kenya's untapped potential, I would like to note that Australia is the 4th largest energy exporter in the world, and that we have specialized in the production of energy and emission-intensive commodities across sectors like mining and agriculture. Our universities and companies have at the same time worked hard to try and bring these emission-intensive industries down in terms of emissions. Hydrogen has been a key component of that. It is pleasing to see that some of these same Australian companies have also branched out globally and have also become involved in Kenya's transformation to green energy. And I note that Worley was the project manager for the construction of the Lake Turkana wind farm. As African economies further their renewable energy targets, clean green hydrogen is increasingly viewed as one of the pathways to reduce fossil fuels. This clean green hydrogen economy is expected to open up upstream and downstream opportunities beyond the energy projects themselves. And we are very pleased to see Fortescue Future Industries' involvement in Kenya and the continent. Australian companies have partnered with Africa over decades to help transform mining here. I would like to think that in the same way, the lessons learned by many Australian companies that are establishing Australia's hydrogen and renewables future are shared with new partners in Kenya and Africa to transform to a clean, green future. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Our first presentation is by Mr. Eric Mwangi, Economic Advisor to the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Energy. Eric has a BSc in Economics and Policy Analysis from Cornell University in New York, and is also the Power Africa liaison within the ministry. With over 23 years experience in advisory and investments in the public and private sector across a number of key industry sectors, including energy, telecoms, infrastructure, agriculture, and education, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Eric Mwangi.
Thank you, Mahul. Thank you, Scott, for doing a lot of my work for me as well, in introducing the renewable energy landscape in Kenya. I think it's an interesting time for the country, for the region, for the continent. Perhaps spurred on a little bit by COP26, but we've seen a significant increase in the interest levels in as far as hydrogen is concerned, particularly green hydrogen. And I just want to cover a few areas that I think start to outline the opportunity for green hydrogen in Kenya. And I think that in some ways they will also provide some insight and some understanding of the opportunity in the region at large. And I think the first area is around the resource estimate. So Kenya does have a significant and a deep renewable energy resource across a number of different technologies: geothermal, wind, solar, as well as hydro. And I think that the estimates are based on the studies that have been done to date. Those studies do actually not, they don't cover the entire country. So they are actually a bit understated in terms of what the latent capacity is. There is an intention to update them in the coming months, but we've seen some numbers that suggest that we have between 10 and 20,000 megawatts of geopotential, about 30,000 of solar, and just about the same for wind. So it is a significant resource capacity. If you look at the way where Kenya is located, the equator kind of cuts us in half, and the north of the equator is actually where you have the deepest resource and the least amount of exploration work done. So there's still quite a bit of potential, and in some ways this might dovetail well with the Australian kind of penchant for exploration in minerals in remote areas. So that might be an opportunity to kind of partner in further exploration. I think the second key area, I think, is locations. So if you look at where the geothermal resource is, it follows the Rift Valley, south from the border with Tanzania all the way up north to Ethiopia. And for the wind, where we see the most potent resource tends to be in the north and particularly in the northeast. So Lake Turkana, actually, if you look at its capacity factors, it's a world-class project. I think last year the capacity factors were north of 70%, and that has been the case on average since the plant was commissioned a few years ago. So it's significant that the resources are distributed across the country. And interestingly, in these locations, you also have access to significant water bodies. So in the center of the country, where the geothermal production is actually happening, there's a trinity of lakes there: Lake Naivasha, Lake Nakuru, Lake Elementaita. And up north, you have Lake Turkana, which is proximal to the wind farm. And of course, in the east, we have the Indian Ocean, and a significant coastline stretching from Mombasa all the way up to Lamu. So getting access to water for electrolysis would not be a challenge. The third area is logistics. Now, you may know that what probably the largest single project that's been undertaken in the country is the SGR, which is the railway line from Mombasa at the coast and terminating inland. In actually where it terminates is probably the most explored area and the largest production area for geothermal power. And we also have a new port in Lamu. I think the first 2 berths are complete. And so from a logistics point of view, there are a number of options available for developing a coherent hydrogen economy. The next point is the load curve for the country. So this is more talking about what are the immediate opportunities. So between 11 o'clock at night and about 6 o'clock in the morning, we do have a significant overhang of renewable energy capacity. Most of that is geothermal, and we estimate it's about between 400 and 800 megawatts for that period of time. And so it is it's capacity that would be available for storage or hydrogen production. And it's something that's a feature of how the system is behaving currently. We have a pipeline of about 2,000 megawatts of wind, solar, and hydro, and a little bit of biomass as well, of committed capacity. So these are projects whose PPAs have already been signed and are at various stages of development. So if you add that to what currently exists in the system as it is today, there is a significant opportunity there to start to think about how to develop projects, even if it's at a pilot level. And beyond, if you look beyond the projects that are that are not committed but are in various stages of development, there's an even bigger, I think it's about between 4,000 and 5,000 megawatts of projects that have at various stages of development that are renewable. They will likely be subjected to some sort of competitive process. There's an auctions policy that has been developed in draft form, but they are kind of off the ground. They've started the development process. And I think lastly, there's a significant amount of intermittency being introduced into the system today. So we've got Lake Turkana wind power, there's Kipeto wind, which is being commissioned now. Actually, I think has been commissioned, which is another 100 megawatts. So, and a number of solar projects that are going to be commissioned in the coming months. So if you look at the system, which is about 3,000 megawatts, a significant amount of intermittency is being introduced. And there's an argument to be made for helping reduce or reduce the level of friction of integrating this intermittency into the system. And I think this is one area that the hydrogen economy could be helpful, because the electrolysis machines can actually be used almost as a modulator for the intermittency. So I think that there's a potential for developing a larger kind of win-win scenario. I think there's the question is what the commercials would look like. But I think from a technical point of view, there's also an argument to be made for introducing hydrogen at scale in a way that benefits the system. And so in short, I think the opportunity is significant. We have seen some private sector interest. I think Scott mentioned Fortescue, who have spent quite a bit of time trying to understand what that looks like. there are a number of other private sector actors who are interested as well in various elements of this. So we think the potential is significant. The ministry is very, very keen to get commercial partnerships going in ways that are aligned with the objectives of the sector. And so we'd be keen to continue to engage around specific opportunities that are identified and that help move this conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was 10 minutes and 2 seconds, spot on. Our next speaker is Ms. Kim Cleary, Market Development at the Global Education Network, International Education Global Victoria. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Mahul. Good morning to everyone in Kenya and afternoon to those of you here in Melbourne. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Today's forum is a great opportunity to connect representatives from government and industry in Kenya to Victorian universities. And I'm sure the speakers today will highlight some of Victoria's world-leading clean energy research and capabilities. And we hope that today will help kickstart some new collaborative partnerships between Victorian universities and partners in Kenya. A little overview of Victoria's renewable energy sector. Victoria is recognised as being a global knowledge hub, attracting the best researchers and investment from around the world. It's home to world-class research institutions and facilities which underpin excellence in research, including in renewable energy. And Victoria is in fact leading Australian renewable energy initiatives. And this is evident by the number of world-class renewable energy research hubs in Victoria. These include the University of Melbourne's Energy Institute that delivers influential research on the transition to a clean energy system, Deakin University's Institute for Frontier Materials, which brings together researchers from around the world to develop innovations in chemistry and engineering, including future energy technology and storage. And of course, the two hubs that are being showcased in today's forum, the Swinburne University of Technology Victorian Hydrogen Hub, a major national precinct designed to explore new hydrogen technologies, clean energy vehicles, and hydrogen storage containers. I hope that I've got that right. And the Monash Energy Institute that accelerates the transition towards a sustainable energy future through impactful interdisciplinary research and education. And the Victorian government is committed to building Victoria's renewable energy capabilities and credentials, and announced in 2020 an unprecedented 1.6 billion Australian dollar energy package to create the renewable energy hubs, improve crucial grid infrastructure, decarbonise our energy system, drive down emissions and support more solar energy efficient homes. And the package included 540 million Australian dollars to establish 6 renewable energy zones, unlocking new investment that will support economic growth and jobs and ensure Victoria meets its 50% renewable energy target by 2030. So a little bit about Global Victoria. Victoria has the largest number of trade and investment offices of any Australian state or territory outside of Austrade. We have 23 such offices in total. And the VGTI office for the Middle East, Africa and Turkey was established in 1997 by Victoria to promote Victorian exports into the Middle East and Africa and attract inward investment and tourism to Victoria, Australia. And during this period, the VGTI Dubai office has been instrumental in facilitating the introduction of many Victorian companies to key investors and business leaders around the region, including into Africa, through official government trade missions and dedicated export programs. And these capabilities in education and trade can play an important role and assist Kenyan energy stakeholders and the government in developing the renewable energy sector and introduce new and efficient technologies. And in my role as a manager in the international education part of Global Victoria, I would like to make a few comments about how forums like this fit into the Victorian government's objectives for international education and the Study Melbourne brand. Obviously, international education is Victoria's largest services export in its own right, and it was worth $13.7 billion to Victoria's economy in 2019, before the sector was impacted by the global pandemic. But international education is not just about attracting international students to Victoria. It's an enabler for global relationships, cultural exchange, talent attraction, and an enabler for all of Victoria's trade and investment interests around the world. So within our global network, we have a number of dedicated education services managers offshore, 12 in total, plus we have 3 education consultants as part of this network in priority countries. And Mahul is one of our education consultants and recently joined our network as a representative in Kenya. And we're very happy that he's done so. It's an important role of this network to help strengthen the connections between Victorian institutions and other institutions and industry partners around the world. And fostering international research collaborations is a real win-win for Victoria and for global partners. It's about sharing knowledge, internationalisation of institutions and research output, the commercialisation of research, and of course, those longer reputational benefits for our institutions, attracting talent and reputation of Victoria as a study and research destination. So with this in mind, we recently implemented a new Study Melbourne initiative to foster international research collaboration. And this is a one-off $3.6 million international research partnerships program, which is supporting not only great research, but importantly, it's about helping our universities enter into new or deepen existing strategic international research partnerships. So all of the projects have now been selected, and it's interesting to note that a number of the projects, and there were 15 in total, and a number of these were supported on renewable energy projects. These include a project between Swinburne University and Jeonbuk National University in South Korea, which is looking at converting hydrogen from seawater using solar energy. A project between the University of Melbourne and the University of Hokkaido, Japan, on harvesting and manipulating thermal energy. And another project in Japan with RMIT University and Kyushu University developing the proton battery and proton flow reactor systems for energy storage. And I have no idea what that is, but anyway, it sounds very impressive. And finally, there's a project between Federation University and the IIT Roorkee Institute in India, looking at critical mineral processing from mining waste. And I mention those just as an example of the projects that Study Melbourne alone is supporting. I'm sure there are others being supported across different parts of government. And it just indicates the breadth and the calibre of Victoria's research capability across a number of universities in this very important field of research and innovation. So that's all from me. I thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I really hope that today's forum will be the start of continued conversations and potential partnerships between Kenya and Victorian universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. It gives me pleasure to introduce Mr. Gordon Chakaodza, Director of the Victorian Hydrogen Hub, VH2, at Swinburne University of Technology, Melbourne. Gordon specialises in bringing together industry, research, community and government to undertake transformative work in the development and adoption of new technologies. To date, Gordon has worked in a variety of roles and has held senior executive roles with private industry, the Victorian government and Austrade. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahul, for the introduction. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, I hope you can all see that, Mahul, if you could just confirm for me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Mahul. So a very good afternoon to our participants joining in from Australia, and good morning to our participants joining in from Kenya and other parts of Africa. So as Mahul has mentioned, my name is Gordon Chakaodza, and I'm Director of the Victorian Hydrogen Hub at Swinburne University. And I'm joined on this call by my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Percy and Dr. Jason Zheng, who are also part of the Victorian Hydrogen Hub team. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are all meeting, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I thought I'd begin by just giving some contextual background about Swinburne University. Swinburne is located in Melbourne, Victoria. It's a top 300 university globally. We're a global leader in research and innovation. The university has 6 dedicated research institutes and 14 research centers, which are all at the forefront of discovery and research and development. Recently, there were 3 new initiatives which were announced funded by the Victorian government. These initiatives include the Victorian Hydrogen Hub, which I lead, which I'll talk shortly a bit more in a minute. And also the other 2 hubs as well, the Air Hub, which is working with industry partners around aviation technology, and as well as MedTech Vic, which is working with industry partners around medical technologies. Given that we have a diverse group of participants in this webinar, I thought I would just begin by setting the context of green hydrogen. Indeed, there are many colors to hydrogen, blue, gray, green, and I've even heard of gold hydrogen, which is emerging. But nonetheless, for the purposes of this presentation, I'll focus on green hydrogen. As many of you know, green hydrogen is a promising zero-emission fuel for the future that will help to decarbonize our world. It is produced by splitting water generated from renewable energy through a process called electrolysis. Australia is investing, the Australian government, I should say, is investing about $1.2 billion around building a hydrogen industry. The Victorian government is also supporting the sector very strongly, as you've heard from Kim in her remarks earlier. And the Victorian Hydrogen Hub is a great example of that Victorian support. Earlier this year, Swinburne University received about $10 million to set up the Victorian Hydrogen Hub. And we are using the funding to work with industry to help make hydrogen adoption at scale a reality. So looking at the potential uses of hydrogen, I think it's fair to say that the potential uses are growing all the time, but I've just highlighted just the main ones there. So particularly around mobility, hydrogen and mobility. So, using hydrogen to fuel passenger and commercial vehicles, as an example. There's potential applications around electricity generation and heat production. Industry is also looking at using hydrogen for fertilizer, plastics, and explosives production. And we've heard earlier on about Fortescue Future Industries, which has a presence in Kenya. And certainly Fortescue Future Industries is making a very big play around green steel here in Australia as well. So what role will Swinburne University or the Victorian Hydrogen Hub play in the hydrogen space? As I mentioned, that we received some funding from the Victorian government earlier this year. And part of that funding is going to go into 2 main areas. Firstly, an infrastructure, and secondly, around people and research. So what you're seeing here in this fly through here is a refueler that we are going to build in partnership with CSIRO, which is Australia's scientific research organization. So this refueler here, which you can see there, will be completed in June next year, and will allow hydrogen vehicles to actually access this refueler so that they can refuel and use those hydrogen vehicles. This particular facility will also have a hydrogen production facility. So by way of background, there are not many refuelers in Australia at the moment. So this refueler, which we will build in partnership with CSIRO, will be the second or third by the time it's completed, which will allow demonstration projects such as any hydrogen-powered vehicles that might come to market. So that's on the infrastructure side. We also have, the funding is also going towards people. And by that I mean is that we are assembling an impressive research team that consists of research fellows, PhD candidates, and master's candidates. And this research team is going to be working with industry to help decarbonize their industry and also answer any research questions that industry might have. So you can see from this slide some of the thematic areas that we'll be working with industry on. So decarbonization of ports, for example. We'll be looking at hydrogen application in the aviation sector. We'll be looking at some projects, particularly with our PhD candidates around the steel making process and how to decarbonize steel. We will also be looking to do some projects in the education and training side of things, particularly in skills. And also we'll be assembling some PhD and master students who have great expertise in modeling, particularly around the techno-economic lifestyle assessment and systems analysis. So a lot of these industries which you are seeing here are very heavy users of fossil fuels, particularly diesel. And hydrogen has the potential to replace that diesel as a clean new energy source. So we believe that our research, which we'll be doing in partnership with industry, is going to have a great impact in decarbonizing our economy. And this is my last slide, just to talk through the Victorian hydrogen strategy in a bit more detail. For the purposes of time, I won't go through this, except just to highlight our strategic priorities, which are highlighted in those 5 boxes, which you can see there. So in that first box, for example, I talked about our partnership with CSIRO around the refueler. We also have a really fantastic partnership with Arena 2036, which is a German research platform based at the University of Stuttgart. And this is where we're working together around hydrogen tanks and storage systems. So that research which will be done in Germany, which gives us access to the research which is happening in Europe, so that we can share it with our industry partners here in Australia. The second box is talking about the readiness program, which we will be working mostly with SMEs here in Australia. By way of background, a lot of SMEs are starting to think about what hydrogen means for them as a business. So through this readiness programs, we'll be giving them training and modules and educating particularly around what hydrogen can help make their business a bit more profitable. So this is based on a similar program we ran around Manufacturing 4.0, which was very successful for SMEs here in Australia. The third box there is our program or initiative around skills, which we're working with industry. So skills is going to be really an important factor in a hydrogen economy. So we are working with industry to identify what gaps are in the market and what courses might be required to support a hydrogen economy in the future. So a practical example of that, for example, is that we are seeing many mobility companies such as buses and trucks coming into the market. But a key question is what kind of skills will be required to actually maintain those trucks and those buses. So this is where we're working with industry on identifying courses and accreditations for the future to actually help maintain those industries in a hydrogen economy. The fourth box is talking about our social engagement toolbox. This is really working with industry and governments around social acceptance of hydrogen or community acceptance of hydrogen. Many of the community still have questions around safety, for example, for hydrogen. So through our researchers and through our research team, we'll be able to answer some of those questions and identify the concerns which community has and help companies, local councils, governments help to address those concerns. And the fifth box, which I think is really relevant for this conversation, is really talking about international partnerships. So as VH2, we are very keen to engage internationally. We have actually started developing some MOUs with international jurisdictions such as Malaysia. So we're very interested to continue the discussion, as mentioned by Eric there. So we'll be really keen to continue discussions with the Kenyan government and indeed any other stakeholders or companies in Kenya around research and potentially how the VH2 research team could get involved or could assist to help make hydrogen a reality. So that concludes my presentation. A very quick 10-minute overview. I hope I've kept in time, Mahu, but I reiterate that we'll be very happy to answer any questions and certainly to have any separate meetings to continue the discussions and talk about future collaboration and partnerships. Thanks very much, Mahul. Over to you.
Thank you, Gordon, for a very informative presentation and within the 10-minute time slot allocated to you. Our next presenter is Mr. Shreejan Pandey, General Manager at the Monash Energy Institute at Monash University, Melbourne. Shreejan has power systems engineering qualifications and professional engineering background, focusing on detailed designs for large-scale wind farms, high-voltage switch yards, substations, and renewable energy systems in emerging nations. Shreejan is responsible for the Monash Energy Institute's development and running of major energy research programs and operations, respectively. Welcome, Shreejan.
Thank you, Mahul, for that introduction. And just also want to acknowledge and thank fellow panelists and the organisers of this event to have this conversation. I'm dialing in today from the land of the Kulin, from the people of the Kulin Nations, and I just want to acknowledge their presence, past, present, and also the elders before I get started. So next slide, please, Emma. And next, a quick introduction about the Monash University. It is Australia's largest university. It has a global profile with campuses in India, China, Malaysia, Indonesia, and a satellite in Italy. The university is home to about 200 academics that work across energy research. Next slide. The energy research that we undertake here, they span from energy materials and devices to explore things like next gen of solar systems and batteries, resources and processing with groups actively working on things like hydrogen and ammonia for widespread commercialization, smart power systems and digital capabilities to manage our electricity systems, and market design and policy mechanisms that respond to the changing both social behaviour and also the sectoral needs in our world today. And for the presentation today, I'll just keep the focus on electricity systems. Next slide, please, Emma. So some of our flagship initiatives at Monash in the electricity space, so they include the Net Zero Initiative. We were the first Australian university to commit to net zero. The United Nations recognised this initiative through the Momentum for Change Award in 2018, I think it was, at COP24. The university has partnered with Woodside, the Australian oil and gas company, to explore new fuel solutions and carbon capture systems towards a zero emissions future, and hydrogen is an active part of that discussion. Monash is playing a leadership role in the Reliable, Affordable, Clean Energy for 2030, which is a national cooperative research centre that brings over 60 partners from Australia as well as international partners, and combines committed resources of around $350 million Australian value. And Monash is taking a leadership role in the Networks program to optimise Australia's electricity grid with new technologies like batteries and electric vehicles and household solar. And lastly, on the transmission side of focus, we have the Grid Innovation Hub. That's a flagship program. We're working with Australian energy leaders to address the complexity that we're facing at the transmission level primarily. Next slide. And the following, thank you. Australia's a long way from decarbonisation in its electricity mix. Its renewables made up roughly 27% of the 2020 fuel mix, and wind and solar make the majority renewable share. But Australians, however, they're highly engaged with renewable energy. Next. So the graph on the right there, that shows the annual installation capacity of rooftop solar systems. And in 2020 alone, we had 3.2 gigawatts of small scale rooftop solar systems installed. And 3.2 gigawatts is, to put things in context, I believe Kenya's entire electricity at the moment that's connected is around 2.5 gigawatts. So that puts things in context. So annually, we're putting on more capacity on our network than the entire Kenya system as it stands today. And this figure excludes the large utility scale solar farms that's also ramping up in Australia. And what that has resulted in is roughly 1 in 4 Australian households with solar systems on their roof. So this rapid rise of solar uptake at the distribution level, combined with the rise of renewables, with utility scale wind and solar generation, it's leading to some critical challenges and questions that required both diversity of thought and collaborative innovation. And Eric touched on some of these complexities earlier. Next. So to send our electric grid, we really designed it back in the day when all we were doing was sending power from a source of generation to a place of consumption. And until recently, the generation and consumption patterns were pretty relatively simple to predict, and any variations were relatively simple to manage. But now we have millions of solar generators connected to our distribution networks, as well as utility scale wind and solar connected to our transmission systems. Variations in weather patterns can lead to grid congestion that make it really challenging to use the available renewable energy. In many cases, we have to spill or curtail renewable energy generation. And sudden variations in weather can also lead to grid stability problems, resulting in blackouts, or in severe cases, harm or potentially death to people. So how do we plan for economic efficiency while optimizing our grids to integrate significant penetration of variable renewables securely? And on the other hand, people now have things like electric vehicles and batteries at home, and they offer new ways to optimize our energy use while simultaneously rewarding those who choose to engage in the process. The energy industry doesn't have a strong history or any history, to be quite frank, of engaging with its customers. So how do we collaborate with our communities, build trust, and people who now have valuable energy assets on offer to provide reliable electricity at a fair price for all? Next. And I'm pleased to see in my readings and prep for this talk that Kenya is actually one of the few countries in the broader Africa region that's demonstrating energy access leadership, with plans to reach around 100% electricity, 100% electricity access by 2030. And across the African region, grid expansion and densification is the least cost option to reach nearly 50% of the currently deprived communities. But many grids, they expect to supply around a third, with the balance made up with standalone systems. Kenya's new connection plans shown in this image seem consistent with Africa's significant transmission and mini grid requirements. So Kenya looks well positioned to demonstrate regional leadership. And there's value in bilateral knowledge exchange between Australia and Kenya as both countries simultaneously strengthen their grids and deploy mini and microgrids. So for example, through the Monash Grid Innovation Hub, novel studies are currently underway to explore various techniques, such as the use of grid forming inverters to connect large-scale wind and solar farms to transmission networks while enhancing grid stability. So Eric, we hadn't quite considered using hydrogen electrolyzers, but I think we might have to take that back to the office. And other studies include things like market design and policy mechanisms to incentivize the uptake of large-scale energy storage. Australia is also building a capability in mini and microgrids designed to participate in the broader energy market. And as Kenya ramps up its mini grid efforts, an ongoing exchange would be of interest. Next. Now, as an example, this is the Monash microgrid at our Clayton campus. The solar generation system and a large battery combined with smart software and hardware technologies, they allow us to control when and how we use our electricity across 20 buildings in our Clayton campus. It allows us to manage our peak demand and also participate in the energy market, responding to economic incentives through either demand or management, through either management of our demand or supply. And we're interested in sharing this experience, and we've made our learnings available through resources. We call it the Microgrid Toolbox, and that's available via that link down below. So that completes my talk, and I invite you to follow links that are in the next slide. I invite you to follow the links embedded here to learn a little bit more about the example projects I've referred to today. And I'll also try and put them in the chat shortly. Thank you, and back to you, Mahul.
Thank you so much, Shreejan. I think everyone would agree that the three presentations we've had from Eric, Gordon, and Shreejan have been very informative, and a great way to get us all thinking about green hydrogen and renewable energy even more so than we already are in Kenya or Africa. We've got about 10 minutes for questions and answers. If anyone's got questions, please feel free to ask. We already have a couple of questions that have been asked in the chat box, which we can start with. First question for Eric is from Kevin Nyakundi. Renewable energy being one of the SDGs, also with the new 50 megawatt solar plant going online not long ago, why is it that we're not producing solar energy at a higher capacity to this day? What are the challenges currently being experienced?
Thank you, Mahul. I think it's important to note that currently we have over 400 megawatts of committed capacity. So that is capacity that basically it's projects with signed PPAs. And so those are projects that are going to be coming on stream in the coming months. In fact, there's I think 3 of them that should be commissioned in the next couple of months. So there is a significant amount of solar capacity that is coming on stream within the next year or so. So you will see many more plants being commissioned.
Thank you, Eric. Second question also to you, Eric. Is there a paper available that can be accessed on Kenya's green hydrogen aspirations and programs?
So we are in the process now of conducting a baseline study, just so that we can have a common understanding of what the potential is, where the potential lies, and once that is complete, we will have a common reference point to start to say what is the scale of the opportunity, and also share it with the public and with partners to say, the interested parties, this is what the scope of the opportunity looks like, and then they can determine where it is that they want to, where it is that the opportunity lies for them in the larger hydrogen economy. So I think probably early next year there should be a document that is shareable with the wider public.
Thank you, Eric. Question for Gordon. Would it be possible to have partnerships between your organization and other agencies across the world who are exploring hydrogen? For example, the Ministry for Energy in Kenya. Do you have existing partnerships across the world to collaborate on research?
Thanks, Mahul. So the the answer to the first part of the question, yes, we would be very open to partnerships with international jurisdictions, including Kenya. So very open to have to start the conversations about collaboration. What we bring to the table, as I mentioned in my presentation, is the research component through our research team. So we can certainly share knowledge, insights in terms of how we are working with industry partners here in Australia. So we are working, as examples, we're working with mobility companies. My colleague on the call, Dr. Stephen Percy, is doing some excellent modeling work with a number of mobility companies. We are working on projects around steel making processes and decarbonizing steel. So these are some of the opportunities that certainly we can bring to and share learnings with international partners such as the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Energy in Kenya. The second part of the question was whether we have existing international collaborations. As a university, certainly we do. However, the Victorian Hydrogen Hub, and maybe I didn't make this quite clear in my presentation, is that it's in its formation stage. So we are 6 months into it. So we haven't concluded those international agreements as yet, but certainly, I talked about Malaysia. We will shortly be concluding that MOU with the government of Sarawak, for example, where we'll be sharing information and insights with the government of Sarawak in Malaysia. So yes, as a university, there's precedents where we've got several international partnerships.
Thank you, Gordon. Next question is once again for Eric. Are there any incentives thought of to encourage uptake in clean energy, for example, solar, for both business and private consumers?
Yeah, so there are some incentives currently, which largely are around duty-free import of solar and wind equipment. I think one, it's important to point out that those incentives come from somewhere else in government. So, Ministry of Energy is in charge of is charged with policy making, but financial incentives, trade incentives, those sit in other arms, other parts of government. So we obviously it's a collaborative effort to determine what those look like going forward. But there are those that exist currently that are largely around import of equipment that is used in the wind and solar installations. So they do exist.
And then following on, from your earlier comment about excess capacity between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. So with that situation in Kenya and the region, the EAPP should spearhead the hydrogen development conversation to have a coordinated approach, given the high capital costs involved. Is the government considering a coordinated effort?
Well, the EAPP itself is a coordinated. It's probably the largest coordinated effort we have in the sector. But it is very, very important in terms of providing flexibility in electricity supply that is going to benefit everybody. Number one, and number two, remember the EAPP is going to be connected to the Southern African power pool, and the largest player in the Southern African power pool is South Africa. And one of the big challenges that South Africa has is decarbonizing its own energy sector, which is heavily reliant on coal. So connectivity of the power pools is going to be a significant driver in just the general decarbonization effort for the region and much of the continent. And to the extent that hydrogen can play a role in that, I think it makes sense to have that conversation. The challenge is that you do have to have on a national level, you do have to know what you're bringing to the table and what your strategy is. even before you invite others to come and think together. So I think we are at the early stages of determining what it is that we have and what our strategy is as a country, and that will now equip us to go to the region and say, this is what we're bringing to the table. Can we have a coordinated effort? Because hopefully by then everybody else has a view as well on how they'd like to approach this.
Thank you, Eric. We've got a couple of minutes left. Unfortunately, Mr. Duncan Harris, the chair for the Australian Africa Chamber of Commerce, has had to leave for their AGM. But may I please ask Mr. Stephen Courier, chair for the Kenya Australia Chamber of Commerce, to provide closing remarks and vote of thanks. Thank you, Stephen.
Right. Thank you, Mahul, and other participants. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm coming up. My name is Mahul Shah. We could be twins somewhere. So thank you again. It was a quite engaging conversation, and also listening to what to come. So I'm really thankful to all participants. Some of them I've seen Eric, Gordon, I know for a long time. And it's good to hear from these, the shifting of the energy sector. As from the chamber perspective, we facilitate a conference every year in Australia where these conversations are held. So it's really for our interest to see this. So in terms of vote of thanks Mahul, Austrade, Australia Chambers, and obviously Swinburne University, Monash, and all the other, and Ministry, I can't forget Eric from Ministry of Energy, has been very supportive for this. And we're looking for more engagement. From the chamber perspective, we want to see this facilitation between Kenya and Australia. That's our core mandate to ensure that this trade continue to prosper. So thank you again, and looking forward for the next engaging debate on this topic.
Thank you, Steve. And I'd just like to echo Steve's, vote of thanks with everyone that's participated today. A recording will be made available by email shortly. And if anyone would like contact details for any of the presenters today, please feel free to either ask in the chat box or please feel free to send me an email. I'll have my email address in the chat box down here. But otherwise, thank you everyone, and we will let you know shortly about the next webinar that we'll be hosting on energy. Thank you.